Mochi Health is here to help you start your weight loss journey with caring, personalized support. Meet one-on-one with board-certified obesity doctors and registered dietitians who truly listen and understand your unique needs. Eligible patients can access affordable GLP-1 medications delivered right to their door each month. No insurance? No problem. Mochi Health accepts FSA and HSA, making care accessible and affordable. And with 24/7 customer service, you'll never feel alone on your path to better health. Get started with Mochi Health today. Take the free quiz at joinmochi.com and use code AUDIO40 at checkout for $40 off your first month of membership. That's joinmochi.com with promo code AUDIO40.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 219 of the True Crime All the Time Unsolved podcast. I'm Mike Ferguson, and with me, as always, is my partner in true crime, Mike Gibson. Gibby, what is going on with you, brother?
Hey, man, I'm doing good. How about you?
Doing great.
Yeah?
My birthday's tomorrow.
It is. Happy birthday.
I appreciate that. I'm about ready to take a well-deserved week's vacation in Gatlinburg.
Yeah.
For my daughter's dance competition, so looking forward to that. Got a lot of stuff going on.
You do. You're a busy guy.
I'm a busy guy. We're busy.
Yeah.
So we have to tape early, and I have to get everything all buttoned up, sewed up, so that I can go on this vacation.
Don't want to leave that in my hands.
No, absolutely not. Not that I don't trust you, but I don't trust you.
I'm just saying.
I'm just
you don't
saying.
want to leave that in my hands. That's all I'm saying.
Well, you said it.
Yeah.
You said it. Hey, let's give some Patreon shout-outs. We had Dana.
Hey, Dana.
Thaisa Galovec.
Ooh, Galovec.
Nina.
Hey, good old Nina.
Jean Marie.
Hey, Jean Marie.
Ann Doyle.
What's going on, Ann?
Dream Death.
What's happening, Dream?
Teresa Golden.
What's up, Golden?
Elisa Lindhart.
Well, thank you, Elise.
Tracy Wade.
Hey, Tracy.
Shantiana Ledden.
That's a long name, huh? Shantiana.
Yeah. Like it, though.
I do.
Teresa Isaac.
Hey, Teresa.
Marissa C.
What's going on, Marissa?
Glenn Arnett.
Hey, Glenn.
Michael Moliterno.
Molintonero.
Justin Layton.
What's going on, Layton?
Jennifer Pritchard.
Hey, Jennifer.
Helen Lindenball.
What's going on, Lindenball?
Michael Desolitz.
Hey, Michael.
Abby Flickinger.
What's going on, Flickinger?
Just Angie.
Oh, just good old Angie.
Angie Nail.
There's the other Angie.
Angelica Rodriguez.
What's going on, Angelica?
And Wade Black.
Hey, Wade.
So we appreciate all the new support. And then if we go back into the vault, Gibbs, this week we selected Abigail Cannon.
Hey, Abigail.
So we appreciate the new support, the continued support. We had some great PayPal donations as well from Jennifer Warmuth.
Hey, Jennifer.
Stephen Kessler.
Hey, thanks, Stephen.
And Teresa Summer.
What's up, Teresa?
Gibbs, right now on True Crime All the Time, we have a really good episode out. It's on a guy named Liam McAtasney.
Yeah, say that again.
Or McNasty, as he probably should be called.
Yeah.
This was a young man who murdered a girl who was his really good friend solely to get his hands on her money. I mean, it's really a story about greed in its purest form.
Yeah, this guy was really cold.
Yeah, he was. Can't forget about CrimeCon. If you're going to CrimeCon and you're buying your badges online, make sure you use our code TCAT. You'll save 10% off the standard badge price, but it also helps us out.
Yeah.
CrimeCon gives us a little something to help us get to Las Vegas.
Let's have some fun in Vegas.
Exactly. All right, buddy. Are you ready to get into this episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved?
I'm ready.
In 1984, 35-year-old Margaret Tapp, a single mother, and her 9-year-old daughter, Seana Tapp, were found dead in their home on 13 Kelvin Drive in Ferntree Gully, Victoria, Australia. This case horrified residents as fears of a pedophilic attacker circulated throughout the neighborhood. Margaret Tapp was highly social and was well acquainted with a lot of people. So this meant that there were a lot of potential suspects, which made it difficult for investigators to find the culprit. Despite the severity of the crime, the case has remained unsolved for over 3 decades.
And that will always make it difficult, right? When you have so many people that knew the victims that had potential
dealings, relationships, or just knew them as neighbors or whatever. Yeah, I think you're right. As opposed to a person who doesn't leave their house a lot, doesn't really like to socialize, doesn't have a lot of friends. Okay, maybe you have a smaller pool of suspects because that person doesn't interact with as many people. So the information that we're going to be talking about in this episode comes from a number of different articles from the Australian news website, news.com. On August 8th, 1984, the Tapp family was visited by a total of 3 people. In the early morning, Seana Tapp's neighborhood friend and next-door neighbor dropped by the house. Seana and her friend would often meet each other in the mornings to walk to school together. However, neither Seana nor Margaret answered the door. Later that day in the afternoon, Margaret's sister's boyfriend, Tony Blackwell, dropped by the Tapp home. He noticed that the newspaper was left outside, despite Margaret's car being parked in the driveway. When he knocked on the door, no one answered. But it wasn't until later that night that the gruesome discovery was made. That night, a man named James Rollins stopped by the home. James and Margaret were supposed to go to the opera that evening, and they had agreed that James would pick her up at 6 p.m. But when he arrived at the house, there were no signs of activity inside. And although her car was in the driveway, no one answered the front door. The blinds on the windows were closed, and the morning's newspaper was still on the front porch. James knew from past visits that the lock on Margaret's back door was broken. So he went around to the back door. He knocked several times, but no one answered. I think at this point, Gibbs, he was pretty concerned.
Yeah, I mean, he had a date. He was supposed to be headed out around 6 o'clock, and she's not there.
Not answering the door, didn't call him,
right,
obviously, and say, hey, something came up, I can't make it. So I think naturally anyone in that situation would be a little concerned. So he opened the back door and stepped inside. He called out to Margaret and also called out to her son and daughter. When James didn't get a response, he decided to search the home. He made his way to Margaret's bedroom, and that's where he stumbled upon a horrific murder scene. James found the body of Margaret Tapp, lifeless on her bed. He reported to the investigators that when he entered Margaret's bedroom, he noticed that she was lying on top of the bed with a blanket neatly covering her. James pulled back the blanket to examine her body. Now, initially, he said he thought she was asleep. Her arms were crossed on top of her chest, just below her neck. But when he took a closer look, he could tell from her complexion and bruising on her neck that something wasn't right. And, he relayed to investigators that he got freaked out, as I think a lot of people would.
Oh, man, I think just that walking into her room, seeing her lying like that, and then as you pulled that blanket off of her, pull it down and you see that bruising, and it'd be alarming. I don't know how I'd handle that.
Well, I think he knew that she was dead. And then his concern became about her 2 children. So he went next door because he knew the neighbor was supposed to watch Seana that evening. So he figured that the children were there. But when he got there, he quickly learned that they weren't. He learned that Margaret's son stayed the night with his grandparents, and Seana had not yet come over to the house. So James called police and then quickly went back inside Margaret's house to try to find Seana. Shauna's bedroom was next to Margaret's. And unfortunately, Gibbs, he discovered her in a similar state as her mother. She was dead with bruising around her neck. Police arrived on the scene, and I think Gibbs pretty quickly, they theorized that based on the bruising and where it was located on the neck area of the victims, they had been strangled. Upon further examination, fibers were discovered around the necks of both victims. This indicated that the murder weapon was most likely some form of rope. The authorities also determined that Shauna had been sexually assaulted before she was killed. The sexual assault of this 9-year-old girl indicated to police that, they were dealing with an individual who had some type of pedophilic tendencies.
Yeah, real sicko,
Authorities determined that Margaret and Shauna died on August 7th. Investigators collected fingerprints from the house, but there were no suspicious individuals highlighted as a result of this. Most of the fingerprints belonged to family and friends of the Tapp family.
Well, this is going to be an issue for the police because it meant that either the killer was lucky or somehow he knew how to avoid leaving his prints at the scene.
Which, yeah, we know there are ways to do that, right? If you wear gloves in the commission of a crime and you have them on before you enter the house, you're not going to leave any prints unless you take the gloves off for one reason or another. Large footprints were also discovered in the home, most of them in Margaret's bedroom and bathroom. The size of the prints didn't match that of Margaret or Shauna, but they also didn't match any family, friends, anything like that. There wasn't a whole lot of information that was extracted from the prints. The big thing was that police knew they were created by a pair of size 11 Dunlop Volleys tennis shoes. So obviously, Gibbs, police thought that these shoe prints came from the killer. And to this day, the footprints remain one of the most significant leads in this case. Now, what I will say is men's size 11 is a pretty common size.
Yeah, for sure. Here in the U.S., it's probably one of the most popular sizes.
I actually think 10.5 is the most popular.
Yeah.
But I wear 11s, and I know that just based on ordering online,
right,
that they're pretty popular as well, because I can usually find sizes smaller and bigger, but 10.5 and 11 seem to be out a lot of the time. But Gibbs, there is a difference between shoe sizes in Australia and the US. So an Australian size 11 is actually a US size 12.
Okay.
So that is on the larger side. Definitely not going to be in the most common shoe sizes for men. I mean, there's a lot of guys that wear 12s, but it's not going to be the most common.
Right. It limits you down somewhat.
It does. I think if you've got that type of evidence, you'd rather have it be big or small, right? What you don't want to have is an Australian size, we'll say 9.5. That's probably in the most common ballpark.
Yeah, it makes it a little more difficult for sure.
The forensics team obtained 2 different strains of hairs that did not belong to the victims. They were found on Shauna's bed. One strand was long and blonde in color, while the other strand was shorter and gray. So, you would think this would be pretty good information. It didn't really lead or provide any significant details to investigators. There was no guarantee that either of these hairs came from the killer. We know hairs travel quite a bit, right? You pick up a hair, someone brushes up against you, you ride in somebody's car, you ride on the bus.
I always feel like I'm picking up somebody's hair from here and no, it's not yours. Every time I sit upstairs at the dining room table.
Oh, I'm sure you are.
And
I have, 3 women who live in my house who all have long hair, and I find it on my shirt.
Yeah. You're like, how'd that get on here?
And the next thing you know, it's in my truck. And, It's hard to get rid of. It's everywhere. You know it's not mine because I have no hair.
Well, you definitely don't have any long hair.
No, not at all. So, what seems like some pretty good information, right? Shoe size, couple of strands of hair. It wasn't enough to identify the perpetrator. During the investigation, authorities collected a sample of semen found on Shauna's nightgown. At the time, the semen sample seemed to be the key to cracking this case. Now, DNA in 1984 was very new. I mean, really in its infancy. I don't think it came, 84, 85, I thought was the first year where it was actually used in a case. So, 84, I'm not even sure that most agencies would have even known about DNA.
Yeah.
But police have been using semen as evidence for a long time.
Right.
It wasn't DNA evidence. They could tell certain things from it. They knew enough to collect it and utilize it in other types of testing. It was theorized that the killer attacked Margaret first. And I think, Gibbs, that's a good theory. Most perpetrators will target the person who they feel is the biggest threat to them first.
Yeah, absolutely.
If there's a man in the house, the man is often targeted first. We've got a mother and daughter in the house. That Margaret is going to defend her daughter with everything she's got.
Yeah, there's no person that would just sit still while their child is being attacked.
No. So I see where authorities are making that assumption. These murders, no doubt, heightened fears among residents. They were scared, but they also wanted someone to pay for these crimes. As police were conducting interviews, a neighbor revealed that they heard a sound that they described as like a muffled scream on the night of August 6th, or possibly the early morning of the 7th, before the murders were discovered on the 8th. It was estimated that the noise was detected after 11 p.m., but before 1 a.m. Okay, so when you say the 6th or the 7th, that's a somewhat large span of time. But when you narrow it down to 11 p.m. to 1 a.m., that's 2 hours.
You close that gap real quick.
Other residents reported hearing the Tapp's family dog bark and howl around midnight, which they said was unusual because the dog didn't do that. It was normally very quiet.
Yeah. So again, it's sitting at midnight time.
Which is important because it fits right in between 11 and 1. Now, as you can expect, police immediately questioned James. Number one, he's the person who found the bodies. And I think also they would have looked at the fact that he had knowledge on how to gain access to the house.
Yeah, it makes good sense, right? He's there, he's inside, he finds the bodies, he makes the call. You could argue, did he have a little time to prep the house before the police got there? Maybe.
Well, sure. I'm sure they were thinking there was all kinds of things. He could have murdered them and then left and come back later and discovered the bodies. But they investigated him and they found nothing suspicious. And eventually, after enduring quite a bit of questioning, James Rollins was ruled out as a suspect. Early on in the investigation, authorities also looked into Margaret Tapp's ex-husband, Don. And that's very common as well. We would expect that. But they didn't find any evidence to link Don to the murders. Police also couldn't find a reasonable motive for Don to want to kill Margaret and Seana. Apparently, they had separated on good terms. There was no bad blood between them. And therefore, Don was quickly cleared as a suspect.
So the police are looking at a lot of people pretty quickly.
Yeah, which is good. That's what you want them to do. They also looked at Margaret's sister's boyfriend, Tony Blackwell. And we mentioned it. He had visited the house before the discovery of the two bodies. Police interviewed him, but he really couldn't provide any significant details about the case. And Gibbs, we mentioned it early on. One of the issues with this case that caused difficulty for investigators was the number of potential suspects.
Well, Margaret was involved with several individuals over a span of time because she was single again.
Yeah, she had divorced in 1979, and by all accounts, she led an active social life. Margaret was a single mother to her 2 children. She worked as a nurse at 2 different hospitals to support her family. She was also a law student at the time, so she had a lot going on.
Yeah, she was busy, man, raising 2 kids, working at a hospital, and also going to school. That's ambitious.
And then on top of that, she had a pretty active social life. So police had a long list of people to interview and investigate. It made it very difficult for them to narrow in on a suspect list and identify the perpetrator. It was reported, Gibbs, that while working as a nurse, Margaret became involved with 6 different men in the medical profession. It was discovered that Margaret maintained a long affair with a male doctor who was married and had a child. And apparently, Gibbs, this doctor was so in love with Margaret that he went to incredible lengths for her.
And he really did. Because to keep the affair going in secret, he ended up buying Margaret a house to live in, rent-free.
Well, I think that shows you this was not a 1-night, 2-night, 3-night stand.
Right.
This was a long-term relationship that they both wanted to keep going. That's what I took from it. And him especially. Obviously, he was willing to go to that length.
Sure, yeah.
The house was located on Kelvin Drive, Ferntree Gully, and Margaret later claimed ownership of the house after the doctor passed away from a car accident in 1983. But Gibbs, as much as I think they tried to keep this a secret, it really wasn't. And there were a number of problems that cropped up. The doctor's wife reported to the police that one time Margaret had visited the doctor to convince him to leave his family and live with her. He refused, and in response to the rejection, Margaret threw a rock through their window. She even stripped naked and laid in their front yard to protest. And I guess the tantrum got pretty bad because the doctor told his wife and child to hide in the bedroom until he was eventually able to calm her down and drive her home.
So that'd be an interesting conversation to have with your wife when you return back home.
Yeah, that's not one that I would want to try to explain. Yeah. And that's why I said, as much as they tried to keep it a secret, obviously it wasn't if the doctor's wife was able to give all these details to police.
Right.
She knew about it.
Yeah.
And I don't know how easy that conversation would have been. I can tell you in my house, I would be afraid for my life.
Yeah. I'd be afraid for your life too.
You should be afraid. If I had to sit down and explain to my wife why a woman was throwing a tantrum in my front yard, it would not be a good night.
You'd be trying to blame it on me.
I would figure out how to.
Yeah.
Another person that police questioned was an individual that Margaret had an intimate relationship with. They had previously arranged to have a lunch date on the day of her murder, but this person was eventually cleared as a suspect. There was another individual that Margaret had some type of vague relationship with. This man was also married. Apparently he was a driving instructor.
It's one of those relationships where he kind of gave her free lessons to make sure that she would hang around with him,
to get to spend more time with her.
Yeah.
So when it came out, police are going to question him. They did, but the instructor was not considered a suspect.
For the police, this is like an ongoing thing, right? Here's another name. Let's check them out. Do they clear? Are we okay with them? Or do we find some additional information about them? It's got to be frustrating, though, right? Because it's, again, resources being used, and you keep finding yourself down that dead-end alley.
Yeah, but what are you going to do? You have to check all of this out as it comes up. There were some other people considered by police to a lesser degree. They had, weaker personal type relationships with Margaret, but they were included in the interview list in the hopes of gathering important information. Because I think what investigators had trouble with is figuring out motive, right? Was this crime committed due to some type of personal matter, meaning someone who had a relationship with Margaret or had an issue with her? And then you have to figure out or balance that side with the sexual assault of 9-year-old Shauna.
Yeah, because that's really bizarre, right? I mean, the killer had the opportunity to sexually assault Margaret as well, but chose not to. I think the police had a question, why did this killer sexually assault Shauna, but didn't sexually assault Margaret?
Yeah, I think that's a big question in this case. And I think it's one of the things that led them to believe they were dealing with a pedophile. Now, they were dealing with a killer, obviously, but they also thought this is someone who has an interest in underage girls. The police also believe that the victims knew their killer, but they couldn't ignore all of these different people who were in relationships or knew Margaret.
Well, like you said, they're going to have to look at every avenue, right?
Sure. But I think that concept of the killer being known to the victims is one to talk about a little bit. I mean, obviously they're speculating.
Sure.
Because they don't know.
No.
But you can see how maybe they could come to that conclusion. Is this a person who knew Margaret and therefore, by extension, knew Shauna, developed an unnatural fascination with Shauna, and that was the impetus for the murders? Okay, you could make that argument. That could be a possible scenario. You could just as likely say that this person saw them on the street, saw them out somewhere, followed them home, and figured out that they were there by themselves and broke in.
But maybe the reason they lean towards the killer being known is because the way the back door was broken. Like they had to have working knowledge of that.
And that makes sense. Again, it's not to say that somebody couldn't have tried all the doors and figured out that the back door was open, but is it more likely that somebody already had that information? And to have that information, you had to know the individuals who lived there, or you had to be familiar with the house or, something like that. There's got to be some connection. That's probably what they were thinking.
Craving your next action-packed adventure? Audible delivers thrills of every kind on your command, like Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, where a lone astronaut must save humanity from extinction, narrated with stunning intensity by Ray Porter. From electrifying suspense and daring quest to spine-tingling horror and romance in far-off realms, unleash your adventurous side with gripping titles that'll keep you guessing. Discover exclusive Audible originals, hotly anticipated new releases, and must-listen bestsellers that hook you from the first minute. Because Audible knows there's no greater thrill than the one that speaks to you. Discover what lies beyond the edge of your seat. Start your free 30-day trial at audible.com/WonderyUS. That's audible.com/WonderyUS.
Yeah.
One person who authorities considered was a neighborhood teenage boy who they said was suspicious. Margaret Tapp encountered this boy when she accepted his offer to mow her lawn. The boy lived on the same street, and he did have a questionable history involving sexual harassment. The boy had made sexually suggestive comments towards a couple of females, and although he was mentioned in the case as a potential suspect, he was never formally questioned or eliminated through forensic testing. And Gibbs, to muddy the waters even further, this boy's sister was living with her boyfriend in a tent in the backyard of the family home. Her boyfriend was later convicted for the rape of another female and sentenced to jail.
not the nicest people.
Well, you've got some things to look at here.
Yeah.
Now you've got a boy that makes some suggestive comments to a couple of females. Is it right? No. Does it mean that he's a murderer? No, it doesn't mean that either.
Right.
Now, I am kind of surprised. We don't know how old this boy was at the time. I am kind of surprised that there wasn't a little bit more further questioning. I don't know if they had enough to really get into forensic testing. Right? You have to have enough to get that far.
Right.
And they may not have had that. But you can't discount the fact that there's a guy right down the street in a tent in the backyard who's later convicted for rape.
It's alarming.
It is.
I think the parents of the boy and the daughter should be a little bit concerned, right? I mean, their boy's being looked at as someone that says some kind of nasty things. And then they have their daughter living in a tent with somebody that was eventually accused and convicted of rape.
I think as a parent, yeah, you've got some concern there.
Yeah.
Another person of interest was a former police officer named Ian Cook. When the police spoke to Margaret Tapp's sister, Joan, the former officer was brought up. Joan had explained that this guy had romantic interests towards Margaret, despite the fact that he was much older than Margaret, and his advances towards Margaret were unwelcomed. But it didn't stop Ian from frequently visiting her house. And I think to make things even more strange, Ian was allowed access to the crime scene under the pretense of collecting a book, which he claimed he left there. So, I think you have to look at that and say, well, obviously this guy has the experience and the knowledge when it comes to a criminal investigation. Could he have easily evaded detection by finding ways to avoid leaving traces of his presence at the crime scene? Or could he make the argument that if something was found, okay, well, here's the reason why it was found, because I came back to get this book. So yes, I was in the house. You might have found, a hair or something like that.
Yeah, but you guys know that because you're the ones that let me in.
Yeah. So, that part to me is interesting. And I think, on top of that, during questioning, this guy refused to cooperate with investigators. And from my understanding, he was never completely ruled out as a suspect, but it's almost as if authorities kind of stopped investigating him. I know, Gibbs, there are some people that speculate that the police didn't bother to interrogate Ian Cook further simply because he was a fellow police officer.
So I think people had concern because they didn't investigate him the way that they should have because he was a police officer. Why would a police officer do something like this?
And I get that, Gibbs. I get why people would be concerned about that. Let's follow up on everyone and vet out all leads. I think the public, they don't want to hear that, okay, this person was looked at, but dismissed without a full vetting because, okay, we can't believe that a fellow officer could have done this.
Right.
Maybe he did, maybe he didn't, but why not interrogate him or question him a little bit more? Do what you did with previous persons of interest and either clear him.
Yeah.
Or maybe you're not able to clear him and then we go in a different direction.
At least do your due diligence, right?
Yeah.
Follow it all the way through.
Exactly. The police learned that on August 7th, a red Ford Ute was parked near the Tapp house. So apparently, Gibbs, a Ute looks kind of like a smaller version of an El Camino.
Pretty cool then.
Pretty cool, because El Caminos are cool.
They are.
And if you have one today in really good condition, I think they're worth quite a bit of money.
Probably are, yeah.
And so I think once they found that out, naturally they thought that quite possibly the owner of the Ute was either involved in the crime or at the very least maybe witnessed something important that would assist in the case. So investigators considered the owner of this car as a person of interest. But to this day, the owner has never been identified. There have been some people who have alleged that a man with ties to organized crime and who had a beef with Margaret's brother drove this vehicle, and that it might have been him.
Yeah, maybe he was parked on the street because he was in Margaret's house committing the crime.
In July 2008, authorities thought they had made a breakthrough in the case. A prisoner named Russell John Gasa was charged with the crime. The DNA from the semen stain, which was found on Seana Tapp, seemed to match Russell. So after 24 years, Gibbs, police thought that they had solved this crime, that they had compelling evidence sufficient enough to convict this guy.
So, yay, right? I mean, everybody's got to be happy. We got the son of a bitch.
They got to be popping champagne bottles.
Yeah.
At this point, because we're not talking about 1988 DNA. You know, by 2008, DNA was evolved to a pretty good degree. I mean, not where it is today, obviously. It continues to evolve, but they had to have been elated.
Yeah.
But a month after the charges, the police were forced to backtrack. It was revealed that the DNA testing was tampered with. The samples were contaminated. Russell's DNA, which was lifted from another item of clothing, was tested in the same lab on the same day as the semen. And due to poor management, the samples were mixed. This led to inconclusive results. So in August 2008, the charges against Russell were dropped. And you know exactly what this does.
Oh, man.
To the public. You know, once they find this out, you know, this discovery of kind of misconduct or mishandling of evidence, it does nothing but raise alarms and kind of cause suspicion about the investigation. You know, how good is the investigation if this is what is happening?
Yeah. And the letdown for the family, right? Any surviving family members that got excited about this, now they're like...
Well, and the other thing it did was I think it caused people to question previously cleared suspects. So if you got this one wrong, maybe you cleared someone based on testing against either the wrong sample or, you know, something got mixed up, and maybe you let the real murderer go free already. Gibbs, the police had to reopen 7,000 cases after this DNA error, according to a Reuters 2008 article, due to the mix-up with the samples. The prints of a pair of size 11 Dunlop Volleys tennis shoes, which were found at the crime scene, became the biggest lead in solving the case. And not that footprints aren't good, they are, but nowhere near as good of a piece of evidence as semen, which you know contains the DNA of the killer.
Yeah.
Now or most likely does.
Now it's ruined.
Yeah. And the one thing that really floored me about this case, Gibbs, was that it didn't get a lot of coverage in the Australian media, especially when compared to other criminal cases that received mass media coverage. Some of the cases we've covered, cases such as the Beaumont children, the Easy Street murders, and Mr. Cruel, a masked serial rapist and murderer of children. These were all widely known cases, whereas the Tapp murders didn't receive hardly any attention at all.
No. And you think, what if the media gave it equal amount of attention?
Yeah, I think that's a question that you have to ask, because do you reach someone then that you didn't reach because the news didn't cover it as much, and that person had information? Maybe they didn't know what they had.
Right, because you've said that many times before, right? It's just a little bit of information could go a long way.
Yeah, a little nugget can break a case wide open. We know that. And I just think it's unusual because of how horrific and chilling these murders were, including the sexual assault of a 9-year-old girl.
Yeah.
Initially, the discovery of the murders were only covered in 5 small newspaper articles. And I think, Gibbs, what that also does, because we've seen this time and time again, right? A lot of media coverage causes residents to become fearful. That in turn puts a lot of pressure on police to solve the case. So it has to be at least partially true that very little coverage would put very little pressure on police to solve the case. I mean, to me, that only makes sense. So you have to wonder, how much did they prioritize this case as opposed to some of these others that we've talked about that received a ton of media coverage?
Yeah.
Now, part of the reason why there was a lack of media coverage was due to Margaret's parents. They made an effort to suppress the story. I mean, I think largely because they just did not want Margaret's personal life in the spotlight.
Yeah, I mean, she was socially active.
Yeah, and we had to talk about some things, right? An affair here, an affair there, but she was active in her social life. Apparently, her parents didn't want some of those details to come out.
I mean, she was divorced, single.
Sure.
I mean,
But I think her parents thought that the media were going to drag her through the mud.
right.
And really kind of play up on some of these things, as opposed to sticking with the murders and the investigation and all of that.
Keeping the focus where it needs to be.
Right. Because if you start really sensationalizing that part of the case, okay, does the public then turn, I don't want to say turn against her, but not feel as strongly about what happened? It's possible. You don't want to think that, but it's possible.
Oh, I think it's extremely possible, right?
It shouldn't be, because you and I have said time and time again, it doesn't matter what your profession is.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter, what type of extramarital activities that you're having. You don't deserve to die or be killed, and a 9-year-old certainly doesn't deserve anything, because they haven't even lived their life.
Right.
But that's what her parents were afraid of. And I think in large part, or in some part, that's why this did not receive the coverage that maybe some other cases did. In 2017, the Tapp murders were reintroduced to the public on the Australian documentary series $1 Million Cold Case, in the hopes that viewers would step forward and provide additional information on the murders. The show revealed that the case was reopened by the Victorian Police Homicide Cold Case Squad, and a reward for information that led to the arrest and conviction of 1 million Australian dollars was offered.
That's a huge reward. You would think that would draw some people out.
Yeah, that's enough money to make someone turn on someone else. And again, I hate to make everything dollars and cents, but when you're talking specifically about rewards, there is a huge difference between a $5,000 reward and a $500,000 or $1 million reward.
Yeah. Someone
may not turn on their partner for $5,000, but people turn on anybody for $1 million.
They make some shit up too.
Yeah. And that's the downside to it. But at least you got the chance that you'll get the real information.
Right.
But there remains a huge problem in this case. And it's the contamination of the DNA testing of the semen sample. Authorities cannot conclusively rule out previous suspects. So because of that, the homicide squad planned to reinvestigate every previously dismissed person. All suspects were to be reinvestigated, their alibis reexamined, and exhibits retested. the problem, Gibbs, is we just couldn't find any updates on that. So they may have done all of that
Right.
and really not uncovered anything, or they may still be working on it. I don't know.
And how much of an issue would that be going back to try to find these people after all these years have passed?
Yeah, it's very difficult. Testing someone's alibi a week after a murder is one thing.
Right.
Testing it 30 plus years after a murder, that's something completely different.
Yeah.
Number one, is the person who gave you the alibi even still alive? Now, the flip side of that is you could have someone who gave a person an alibi. Let's say they were married at the time, that relationship ended badly, and now they're willing to say that, no, that person wasn't really with me.
Right. Yeah.
So that could happen as well. But I think you'd have to say it's tougher for the most part.
Yeah.
The tragic deaths of Margaret Tapp and Seana Tapp remain unsolved. No convictions have been made, although investigators have been pretty open in providing details and names of a number of persons of interest. The overwhelming number of potential suspects makes solving this case incredibly challenging. It's been over 3 decades. They haven't been able to solve it so far. But, I mean, based on what we've seen in the research, police haven't given up.
Yeah. I just, again, I know we've talked about it. I just wish they had some of that DNA left, because I just think that's how you're going to solve this one.
Yeah. I think that was a blow. Once that happened, it made solving this case so much tougher.
Yeah.
You think that happened in 2008?
Yeah.
So, 13 years. All right. Did somebody's DNA get put into a database in the last 13 years? The killer? Possibly.
Sure. Yeah.
But doesn't matter because you have nothing to test it against. You have nothing to match it. So that's for me, the toughest part in the investigation of this case.
You go back to them collecting the semen and keeping it and storing it and having it around. And finally in 2008, they get the opportunity to use it. So all that effort, wasted.
And there are DNA techniques that have come into fashion in the last few years that weren't around in 2008. When you're talking about genetic genealogy, I mean, that DNA could be used to identify the killer's family and then work your way down from there. We've seen a number of cases solved like that.
Yeah.
Golden State Killer being one of them. So you just have so many fewer options after losing that DNA. There's just no doubt about it. So it's a tragic case, Gibbs, as we wrap it up. A mother, a 9-year-old girl. And I do feel bad. We did have to say some things about Margaret that were not flattering. I mean, there's no way to sugarcoat that.
Yeah.
But I don't want people to take it as though that stuff in our eyes made her a bad person. I don't think that way at all.
No.
But those were facts.
Yeah.
Those things actually happened. And I think they could play a part in what happened to her. So you have to include them as you're working through the case.
But you certainly can't leave it off the table.
No, you can't, because it could be an important facet.
Yeah.
But that's it for our case on the unsolved murders of Margaret and Seana Tapp. We've got some voicemails, Gibbs. You want to check those out?
Yeah, let's hear them.
Hi, sorry I'm a little raspy. My name's Rachel, and I'm in Pittsburgh, and I was calling because I do enjoy the show quite a bit. I feel like you guys remind me of friends I would have, but what I wanted to say is I've been noticing a lot that you guys have been saying that these women or people didn't deserve to be murdered, particularly sex workers, because they had family or friends that loved them. And I feel like, you know what, there are people who don't have anyone who loved them. And that doesn't mean that they deserve to be murdered either. They still have value. They still are humans. And just because someone doesn't love you doesn't mean that you don't deserve to live. And it only means, obviously, that you deserve to live longer because you need to find those people. And it's all the sadder when they don't have someone that loves them and don't have someone that cares. Again, I apologize for calling when I'm raspy. I work with little kids, and now that things are done, somehow, even though I'm vaccinated, I'm raspy and not so great. But I appreciate the show. I appreciate you guys. Just remember, it doesn't matter if someone loves you, you're worthy of love. Thanks.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. The only thing I would say is, Gibbs, I can guarantee you we've never said that people who don't have someone that love them deserve to die. I guarantee you we haven't.
No.
So, I mean, I get what you're saying. We often talk about the fact that, this victim was someone's sister, someone's child, someone's mother.
Yeah.
But we definitely don't feel that way.
No,
So,
not at all. But we appreciate it
yep, definitely.
and feel better.
Hey guys, this is Autumn from Maryland. Just want to say I like you both. I'm probably more Team Gibby because I can relate a little bit more about remembering certain things and forgetting names and titles. Excuse me. So I just listened to the Unsolved about Ken McElroy, and I had to Google the movie. I don't know if you did or anybody else has called in, but the movie based upon the killing of Ken McElroy is called In Broad Daylight. I'm probably going to check it out if you guys wanted to, but just keep yourself safe and keep your own time ticking. Thanks.
Love it. And Gibbs, I know you watched that.
Yeah, it was just on the other night.
Yep. I've seen it, but it's been a while. I think we probably couldn't remember the name of it during the episode. I'm assuming that's why she's saying that.
Right.
But I don't think I've seen it since, but I know I've seen it at some point.
Yeah, it starts out kind of interesting.
But you don't remember the details.
I don't. I knew you were going to head that way.
Hi, Mike. I'm listening to the Patreon-only episode on Joseph Callinger. And this is Cheryl, by the way, from Des Moines. I always forget that part. And I just heard you say that Real Genius, Mike Ferguson, is one of your favorite movies of all time. And I am so excited that somebody else out there shares my great love of that movie. I could talk about that movie for hours on end. So I just wanted to say, yay! I'm so happy to have found a fellow Real Genius fan. I think it is one of Val Kilmer's finest hours. Or two. And I just love him in that movie. I just love that movie. I could go on and on. All right. Well, I just wanted to say thank you for making me feel like a normal human being, because I love that movie so much. And I love you guys. You're the best part of my day. All right. Thanks. Keep your own time ticking.
So how did that movie come up in that episode again?
I forget. Well, I don't remember.
Well, maybe it was me bringing it up because he heard voices in his head.
It was, but you didn't know what the movie was. I had to tell you what it was.
Well, that's normal.
I think you did start the conversation.
That's just a normal day.
But I knew what it was because it really is one of my favorite movies. And I'm sure if you looked at Rotten Tomatoes, it probably gets a terrible score. I don't know.
Pretty sure it does.
But, it's kind of one of those guilty pleasure type movies. If it's on, I'll watch it.
You certainly knew every detail about
I've seen it. Maybe 50 times.
I'm like, is that the one with the dude's in the closet? And you're like, named his name and what he did. And you're like, oh my gosh, man, he knows it all.
Some of those people just have those guilty pleasure type movies, and okay, other people might not like it, but for me, it brings me back to when I was younger. I remember watching it as a kid. I wanted to be Val Kilmer. I wanted to be able to do the little quarter thing. He does it in Top Gun and other movies too, but I wanted to wear bunny slippers and not have to, worry about authority and all that. I guess that's what I got out of it.
Be your Huckleberry.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So hey, since you guys are brought it up, what is your number one guilt-free movie or whatever you described it as?
My number one guilt-free movie. Guilt-free. I don't feel a lot of guilt when I watch movies.
Your number one
guilty pleasure.
Guilty pleasure. Yeah, that's what I meant.
So this is a movie that I've watched with my kids a bunch of times. It's called Private Eyes, and it stars Don Knotts, and who's the other guy? The guy from the Carol Burnett show. Super, super funny.
Oh, Tim Conway.
Tim Conway.
Yeah.
And they're private eyes going to like this mansion to investigate a murder.
Yeah.
And it just cracks me up.
It's just funny.
Yeah, but it's probably a terrible movie to 99% of the population.
Yeah. But it makes you happy.
Oh, it makes me happy. I laugh the whole way through, and then my kids and I have watched it a bunch of times.
Can't go wrong with Don Knotts.
Yeah, I love Don Knotts, and actually Tim Conway's probably my favorite.
I love watching him on Carol Burnett.
Yeah, so funny.
Yeah.
All right, Gibbs, enough movie talk. We got to get out of here. That is it for another episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved. So from Mike
and Gibby,
stay safe and keep your own time ticking.